Okay, so we're gonna skip forward to the halfway point. For the most part, I feel like the beginning of this episode was more or less a continuation of where we left off at the end of episode 3, which is basically Mark finds himself in the desert. Don't remember her name. At least I don't remember her name currently. She's his wife. And Khonshu's just like reversed the stars, and he's basically been imprisoned. And we see the tail end of the imprisonment where he's placed on a wall with a bunch of other statues. That can become important later on down the line, especially in regards to Gore being in Thor Love and Thunder, because the question then becomes, who are these other gods slash deities that the Egyptian gods have essentially sealed away because they find them to be too dangerous. But I really want to skip ahead to the tomb part, where essentially they show up at the tomb and there are little hints on the floor, such as the ceremonial dagger with the blood that's like running in the direction of the tomb that they miss, and a bunch of like the other chaos happening outside the tomb. Because this was a tonal shift, and I'm the type of person that I like horror when it's done well. I despise jump scares, but when you inject something that causes you to like sit up because there's like a weird creepy factor to it, that's fantastic as hell. So when they go into the tomb, the very first thing you hear is like this clicking, and I was like, what the fuck is that? Because automatically the second I hear that inside this tomb, my anxiety shot through the roof. I'm a 90s kid, so I grew up with Brendan Fraser and The Mummy and The Mummy 2. So I automatically don't trust any type of dark Egyptian tomb that I end up in any way, shape, or form. Like, you put me in a tomb, or if there's a tomb in a game, or if there's a tomb in a movie, it is definitely cursed in some way, shape, and form. And I love the fact that they played into that. Because as both, I think at this point in time, Mark was no longer in control and was Steven in control. And Steven and the wife, whose name I'm going to completely forget, but I'll remember it for the next video, they're moving through the tomb and they're pointing out things that they see on the ground, like a blood trail that goes this way, bullets, and they ask, what were they shooting at down here? And I was like, I really hope you guys don't have to run into it. But then they get into like that ceremonial burial chamber. Fantastic. Because the creep factor like shot through the roof. Because as they're going through the chamber, I love the fact that Steven's just like this wealth of knowledge. And the relationship between both Steven and the wife is a lot more interesting now, at least in my opinion, because Mark takes issue with it because Mark sees Steven as another person. And it feels to in Mark's perspective, and I love the fact that after Steven kisses him, Mark's able to take control of the hand and just punch he punches him in the face. And I love that like we're hearing like the manifestation sound now. So we got like a partial manifestation sound, the hand starts shaking, and then Steven's like, what the hell's going on? It's like wham, just instantly punches him in the face and he falls down. But the way in which Mark views Steven is he doesn't view Steven as just like another persona of himself. He views Steven as like his own entity. And they play into that later on where essentially the characters end up at the end of the episode. But I really like the fact that there's a battle of love between both Steven and Mark, where Steven wishes to be more open with her, whereas Mark wants to essentially keep secrets because he thinks that he's protecting her. But inside the tomb, there's just this great horror sequence because they get to like the ceremonial table and there's blood all over it and entrails, and then there are the knives, but then there's the organs in the jars, and then the jars are covered with blood. And I was like, what is this supernatural tonal shift? Like, Marvel can really do creepy and spooky if they wanted to. And listen to me, listen to me, you're making a Blade movie, you are making a Blade movie. This is what I'm expecting. Like, I'm expecting the vampires to be terrifying. Like, spooky, supernatural, creepy as shit. We don't have to go the route of Wesley Snipes, where they're like part supernatural, creepy, part 90s hipster. We don't need to go that route. But if you're able to hit like this type of mark where they're just like these supernatural primordial creatures that do nothing but hunt down humans and drain their bloods, and Blade's got to daywalker them with his sword, please, let's go that route. Because this is just a taste, just a whiff of things that the Midnight Suns have to go up against on the supernatural side of things. I fucking love it. I would have preferred if the way in which this entire thing had begun, instead of getting those horrible CGI dogs, we'd gotten these things like early on, where Kevin Bacon like I'm never gonna stop calling him Kevin Bacon, because like every single time I see him I think of Kevin Bacon from Tremors. But Kevin Bacon could have easily woken up one of these guys from a sarcophagus in the museum and just had that be the nightmare, hunting Mark throughout the entire museum. Well, hunting Steven throughout the entire museum until Mark takes over and kicks its ass. Way more effective than the dog. I feel as though the CGI for the dog in the first episode could have been saved and put on the CGI for the dog in the second episode to make that dog more terrifying, due to the fact that regular humans couldn't see it, only Mark and Steven could. But this leads it to like a really dope sequence where, like I said, less is usually more, where you're not seeing the full creature. It's pursuing her, but you're not seeing the full creature. And there's like that awesome shot of the arm when it comes out of the wall and it grabs her, and she's able to shake it off. You're like, oh, thank God. So it's going to come through like a thing. But then like it reaches out and it grabs her from behind and pulls her into the shadows. And she's able to break free. But then like it reaches out, grabs her again, and yanks her back in. Like, I like shit like that. Shit like that's dope as hell. And I thought that was a really great sequence. I also thought the sequence between her and Kevin Bacon was also fantastic as well, where he basically sits down and he more or less reveals what we had suspected beforehand, which is the fact that Mark was one of the mercenaries who was responsible for her father's death. Now, he finally does come out and say that he's not the person who killed her father, but he was working with the man who did. And I'm wondering whether or not this person is still alive, because we know that he betrays Mark and he kills him, and then Khonshu's the one who brings him back. So then the question becomes whether or not if her father had a pact with Khonshu in some way, shape, or form, or if Khonshu was basically waiting around for Mark to die before he took over. If you hear sniffles, that's because I'm still sick. Watch the episode, putting out some content for the channel, you know, but we are still sick out here. Now, this leads into a very interesting ending, where I wasn't expecting them to tap Alexander the Great as the person who was Amunet's voice, which was dope as hell. I love the mummy references of the fact that he was buried, and because he was her voice, they placed her containment, that statue thing, that's name I completely forget, they placed it in his throat and then buried him in a secret sarcophagus, surrounded by essentially retainers that would kill anyone attempting to get to the main sarcophagus itself. But the episode ended wildly because I did not expect Kevin Bacon to kill Mark. Well, technically he shot Mark, because Steven was in control, and he gives Mark control in order for Mark to fight off what he thought were going to be the creatures, but turned out to be Kevin Bacon and his goons. But they end up in a super, super interesting place, because they are not technically dead, but at the same time they're not alive. They're kind of like in purgatory, or the halfway point, which is where you would go before you would proceed to the afterlife. Or where you would go if the afterlife wasn't ready for you, and then you would proceed back. But when they end up there, there are patients and doctors who basically look like people that Mark and Steven have encountered on a daily basis. But one of the interesting things that I like the most is that basically if Mark was acceptant of where he was, like, oh, it was told you I'm sick. Where was I? Right. If Mark was acceptant of where he was, then essentially he would have just passed on. But because he essentially saw that this entire construct was bullshit, he was able to force himself to not pass on and essentially get away. And I like the fact that as he was running, he runs into a corridor with a bunch of rooms, and in one of the rooms, Steven's in a sarcophagus. And they're able to hug, which kind of low-key confirms that if Mark dies, then both he and Steven would essentially proceed to the afterlife as separate beings, because they see themselves as separate beings. And the dope shit is, in another room, there's another sarcophagus and somebody's trying to punch their way out, but they can't get out. That's my boy Jake. If I remember correctly, that's the other persona. The one with the fedora hat who drives the taxis. Dope as hell that we keep seeing references to him. I cannot wait until we actually get to see his character. Knowing his character, he's probably just going to kick open the fucking sarcophagus himself and, like, save himself. But I love the fact that we're constantly getting teases for the last few episodes that my boy is coming, and he's definitely going to be like the one with the best hands. But at the end of it, they run into a hippo, and I think her name is Tawa Eret. If I fucked that up, I'm so sorry, but I swear that is her name. She's the Egyptian god of fertility and childbirth, but she's also the god responsible for death. Not the one who kills you, but she's responsible for ferrying your soul from the human plane to purgatory and then ushering you into the afterlife. Or if you get into purgatory and it's not your time yet, sending you back to the human plane. But this episode was dope as hell. I think Moon Knight's been low-key delivering every single episode. The most recent Thor Love and Thunder trailer definitely showed that Gore is most certainly on the way. I am super fucking excited for Gore. We're probably not going to get any hint to him in Moon Knight, but it would be dope if at the end of basically this limited series run that we actually got a shot of the gods' home world and they're just all dead, or like a vast majority of them are dead because Gore's already like run through the population. But this is another solid episode. I fucking dug it. I'll probably drop a video about Tawaret herself, since her whole backstory in and of itself is super fucking interesting. But yeah, that's the end of the video. I will catch you in the next one. Peace.